Hi, my name is Francesca Weikert. I am 19 years old and I am currently studying environmental studies and business at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington. I have had the incredible opportunity to come to Dubai for a month and to study and learn from Professor Hersh Chadha. I came here because I wanted to see how different cultures and different religions perceive the environment and how different cultural values affect and influence your perception of climate change and sustainability. And I thought it would be interesting to come to a different country and to just see how climate change is being dealt with in a different way from where I am from. The first week I was here, I had the chance to learn a lot about Hinduism and Islam as a background. And then I had the opportunity to learn about what our CO2 emissions is doing to the climate, so how our CO2 emissions is causing glacier melting. And because of glacier melting, there's a lot of fresh water in the ocean, and this fresh water causes a rise in sea level and a rise in the temperature. You can look at some pictures of the Columbia Glacier in Alaska, for example, and just over time you can very visibly and tangibly see how the glacier is decreasing. It's a very visible manifestation of climate change. Upon that, I learned about the energy and how fossil fuels are creating these CO2 emissions and what alternative energies we could use that would reduce CO2 emissions. Finally, I spent some time reading a few chapters of the book Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think. It's written by Peter H. Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. Diamandis is the co-founder and the chair of the X Prize Foundation, and Stephen Kotler is a very well-known author and journalist. And basically, they are telling us that everything we are looking for on the planet, all our resources, we do have them in abundance, and we also have abundant ways of solving the issues that we are facing today in regards to climate change and world issues. So we're thinking about fixing climate change, conserving our natural resources, and creating an interconnected, sustainable planet. It sounds like a very big challenge. I agree with you, it does. It's an economic challenge, a technological challenge, and a political challenge. But what really is slowing down, as James Baylog says, the scientist, environmentalist, mountaineer, and founder of the Extreme Ice Survey, is the public psychology and perception. And I would personally like to add fear to that list too. It's fear of the future, fear of what is going to happen to us, what is going to happen to future generations, what is going to happen to our planet. We can see the melting of the glacier, we can see the temperature rise and feel it, and therefore we're a little bit scared. Baylog puts this as a psychology of denial, allied with complacency, avoidance of responsibility, and fear that is keeping us from taking action on climate change. I think a lot of it is also the fear of commitment. We're fearing to commit to doing something, the fear of committing to take risk, the fear of taking extraordinary actions. Fear and commitment walk hand in hand. With a lot of fear, there is no commitment. I, for example, really like to spend time in the mountains and I like to rock climb. And if I don't commit to reaching to the next hold, I usually fall. But when I say to myself, I can do it, I'm committed, I have the power and the strength, I reach and I get it, and then I'm rewarded and can move on to the next route and a harder route. And I think it's like that with every sport, and I think it's like that with life too. If you don't try, you don't know. With climate change, you have to commit to positivity. You must realize that we do have abundant sources of energy. The amount of solar energy, for example, hits the atmosphere, and it's 174 petawatts. About half of that then reaches the Earth's surface. There is more solar energy falling onto the Earth in one day than what we use in 1 year. And the sun will be shining for another 5 billion years, I promise you that. So we must commit to being positive. We must search for new opportunities and act upon them. We can't just sit around and think that someone else will do it, because they won't. We have to do it. We need to combine our skills and our knowledge, and we need to use the modern technology as a tool to act together as one society and one planet. As Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. We need to create a new way of problem solving and thinking. So here's our goal. We are working towards abundance. What does abundance mean? Abundance is defined as a very large quantity of something. The synonyms are plenty, wealth. We're not trying to provide everyone in the world with luxury and with a nice car and with a nice house, but we are trying to provide everyone with a life of possibility. But a life of possibility is not probable without the basic needs. I mean, look around you. You have fresh water, you have fruits and protein to eat, you have a shower, you have a toilet, you have education. You have possibility. You have the possibility to make your life extraordinary. But not everyone does. People spend the day walking 9 hours to bring home 40-pound jugs of water for the family at night, only to do it again the next day. And I know you've heard this very many times, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, what am I supposed to do? Quit my job and find a cure to world hunger? No, that's not very improbable. I understand that. But I think if we all act together and use the knowledge we have, the resources we have, the technology we have, and remain inspired and motivated, we can achieve something and work towards a better planet, if only we commit to it. So in this book, Diamandis and Coulter create a pyramid of abundance. This pyramid of abundance is displaying all the human needs, what every person needs in order for them to positively be able to contribute to society. At the bottom, we have the basic needs for survival, which are water, food, and shelter. So that's pretty basic, right? Then above that, we have a catalyst for personal growth. So we have energy, education, and technology. And then at the top, we have the two most important, what every human needs and able for them to contribute to society, and that is freedom and health. This is not a very beautiful representation, but you get the point. It's a triangle. We start here. This is our basis, and in order to build onto that, we have to achieve this. Then we can add energy, technology, and education, and when we have both of these two, we can add freedom and health. But it's all interrelated, correlated, but without these three, the basic human needs for survival, these cannot be achieved. So let's look at water, right here. Currently, 1 billion people lack access to water, and 2.6 billion people lack access to basic sanitation. Half the world's hospitalizations are due to people drinking water contaminated with toxic chemicals and hazards. Diarrhea is caused by an infection agent in water, and it accounts to 4.1% of all global disease and kills 1.8 million children a year. If we can solve this one problem, water, we will save the 135 million people who are estimated to die before 2020 because they lack safe drinking water and proper sanitation. Additionally to that, we will add the 5% of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP back, which they now are spending on health, productivity losses, and labor divisions, which are all associated to dirty water. Also, clean water will help those suffering malnutrition and hunger, because if you don't have clean water and you're dehydrated, your body is unable to absorb the nutrients that it needs. So basically, by solving one thing, our water issue, we would alleviate world hunger, relieve poverty, lower the global disease burden, slow down population growth, and preserve the biosphere. Children, for example, would not have to gather water for food and to boil for other things, and instead they could go to school. I'd like to talk about an individual named Peter Thumb. In 2001, he spent some time in South Africa where he was working on a bottled water project. Every day he would see the work that children and women had to do in order to get water. But especially one day he was driving on a dirt road, which was very far away from the village, and he saw one woman walking on it with a 40-pound jug of water carried on her head. And he could see the visual just exhaustion and suffering written in her face, and he decided there really is something that needs to be done. So he went back to the US and he created what is called Ethos Water. It's a brand of bottled water that donates a portion of it to help children get clean water and to raise awareness about this issue. Through this, he also inspired Starbucks to give 5% of their earnings that they make on water-related products and donate it to him. So far, he has been able to help over 500,000 children through this. Now let's move up one level and look at energy. The first energy that humans used was from fire, and to make fire they needed wood. So they collected wood and made a fire, and they used the fire to cook, to stay warm, and the wood then to build shelter. That was followed by the muscle energy of domesticated animals, such as oxen and horses, which was then followed by wind and water energy, and later on steam, coal, and oil. The UN tells us that today, 500 million live without electricity. 3.5 billion still rely on primitive fuels such as wood, charcoal for heating and cooking. 70% of the sub-Saharan Africa lives without any electricity. Energy is one of the most important parts of this pyramid. Without energy, we will not have clean water. We will not have food, and we will not have shelter. Without energy, we will not have light, so we won't be able to study. We will not receive good we won't receive good education. And we won't have technology. And without all of these, we won't have the freedom and the health that we need. So with enough electricity and energy, we can solve issues of water scarcity, which helps address most of the current health problems. And energy also brings light, which then facilitates education. I would like to read a quote by Mercy Nima, who's a Kenyan doctoral student. 85% of her nation has no energy. And in this quote, she very well paints out the picture of what it's like. Imagine being forced to rely on burning poor-grade wood, dung, or crop waste to cook, suffering the effects of the potential fatal toxic fumes given off by this fuel. Imagine being desperately ill and turned away from a clinic because it has no electricity and can't offer even the simplest treatment. Imagine your friends living under the shadow of life-threatening disease because there's no vital vaccine due to lack of refrigeration. Imagine if you or your partner were pregnant and went into labor one night and had no light, no pain reliefs, and no way of saving you or the baby if there were complications. So on the bright side, according to the Trans-Mediterranean Renewable Energy Corporation, enough solar power hits 1 square kilometer of Africa's desert to produce equivalent of 1.5 million barrels of oil or 300,000 tons of coal. The solar power in the desert of North Africa is enough to supply 40 times the present world electricity demand. So Africa has 9 times the solar potential of Europe. So you see, the energy does exist there in abundance. But we first have to solve the basic problems in order to move up to the next level. We need to solve problems associated with water, food, and shelter before we can move to energy, like education and technology. Everything is connected and interlaced. It's what we call a cycle. Now let's move on up to health. Preserving good health and providing good health care are core components of an abundant world. Acute respiratory infections, for example, are one of the leading causes of serious illness worldwide, accounting for 2 million deaths each year. The most at risk are youth, elderly, and the immunocompromised. We have been able to treat these diseases for almost half a century, but it still accounts for 19% of all deaths in children under 5. And the drugs to treat this are generic and not expensive. What really is the problem is the diagnosis and distribution. So to treat respiratory infections, we have to take a blood test. And for that, you need sterile equipment and trained personnel. And then after sampling, the tests are sent to labs, and sometimes it takes days or weeks for the testing to return back to the doctor's office. This sounds very simple, but the problem is that these tests are very expensive and the transportation can be non-existent in developing worlds. So it's hard for individuals to go to the doctor and first of all pay for the tests, but second of all even get there, and then even more come back another time when the lab test is back and when they need to get their treatment. This is why the lab on a chip is currently under development. Lab on a chip is packaged into a portable cell phone-sized device. It allows doctors, nurses, and even the patients themselves to take a sample of their bodily fluids, for example, urine or just a tiny little bit of blood, and then they can run dozens of diagnostics on the spot in a matter of minutes. And this data is then instantly uploaded to the cyber world where it's collected, and then it can be analyzed for deeper patterns. And this is really helpful because these large quantities can be analyzed and they can be collected, and then the material data will be crucial in halting the spread of new emerging diseases and pandemics. So why is right now the perfect time to care about this and the perfect time to take action? I know it's really easy to say someone else will do it or I'll do it tomorrow, but you can't always do that. This is something that we have to act today. And it's a good time because we have technology and we have very motivated and knowledgeable people in our world today. So I first want to talk about the exponentially growing technology. Even centuries ago, the growth of technology was local and linear. This means we would take one step forward, and another step forward, and another step forward, and another step forward. Today, it is exponential and global, which means we take one step forward, and then 2 steps, and then 4, and then 8, and then 16, and then 32. In 1861, for example, it took 17 days and 17 hours for Abraham Lincoln's address to be delivered from the east end of the telegraph line to the western end of the telegraph line in Nevada. And this was via the Pony Express. This was a very celebrated success story. It was the fastest it had ever happened. They had fresh relay horses positioned every 10 miles. But think about it. It's not even 200 years later, and today we can communicate via Gmail chat, Twitter, Facebook chat. We can communicate everywhere at every time. We can Skype, which is live and in color. If we had the right equipment, we could even do it in 3D. The technology is growing so rapidly, and it is a very immense tool for us. We also are experiencing the do-it-yourself revolution right now. And I'm not talking about doing it yourself and growing your own food or brewing your own beer. I'm talking about the fields of genetics and robotics. I'm talking about individuals like Craig Vane, who created the Human Genome Project. Do-it-yourself work ethic goes very far back. It goes back to Ralph Waldo Emerson's 1941 essay, Self-Reliance. Then it resurfaced again in the arts and creativity renaissance of the early 20th century, and it really gained steam with the hot rodding and home improvement movements of the 1950s. What really initiated it, or when it really gained following, was in the 1960s, where the Whole Earth catalog came out, which was calling Americans to live off of the land, and it gave them illustrations and directions on how to live with the land, in the land, and use the land as your first and foremost resource. And this do-it-yourself means completely without the help or support of government or authority. So a social entrepreneur is a do-it-yourselfer that takes on big government social programs. He is defined as an individual who combines pragmatic result-oriented methods of a business entrepreneur with the goals of a social reformer. So after the explosion of the internet, websites like DonorsChoose.org, CrowdRise, and Facebook evolved, and they began to take up issues that had once been sole properties of international agencies such as the United Nations and the World Bank. So through the rise of internet and technology, people can on their own create charity, can create websites that add to helping solve these problems. Kiva, for example, is a very good example. It was launched in 2005 and is named after the Swahili word for unity. The website allows for anyone in the world to lend money directly to a small business in the developing world via a peer-to-peer microfinance model. By 2009, the site had grown to 180,000 member entrepreneurs that received 1 million loans per week, $1 million of loans per week. As for 2011, a Kiva loan was made every 17 seconds for a total amount lent of more than $977 million. Additionally to the growing technology and the do-it-yourself revolution, we have what we call Techno Philanthropists. So we're talking here about large-scale philanthropology, which is based on a private, not public sector. It's pretty much what John D. Rockefeller did for oil in the United States, what Andrew Carnegie did for iron and steel, what Cornelius Vanderbilt did for railroads, and what Henry Ford did for automobiles. Rockefeller took $50 million worth of oil stock in 1910 to create a foundation bearing his name. By the time of his death in 1937, he had given away half of his fortune. Today we're talking about the founders of Google, of Facebook, of Twitter. We are talking about Mohammed Yunus, who started the Grameen Bank and helped 100 million people move away from poverty. We are talking about Ann Cotton, who has educated over 250,000 African girls through her organization, CamFed. We are talking about very intelligent individuals who are creating, who are inventing, who are making large fortunes but giving most of them away. Now let's talk about what Diamandis and Katter call the bottom of the pyramid. It's the world's biggest rising market. I have two quotes that'll help define that a little bit better. We're talking about the bottom of the pyramid, which they define as the poorest of the poor. This new generation, growing up with freedom of communication, says Chadha, are plugged into an information and entertainment world that didn't exist before. They have needs and wants that exceed those of the older generation, and they're going to be demanding in terms of the quality of their life. So basically, we brought technology to these societies, and now they're catching up because of this, they're communicating because of this, they're experiencing what we are experiencing, and they are desiring what we are desiring. For the first time, not only are their voices being heard, their ideas that we've never had access to before, are joining the global conversation. And if for no other reason than the law of large numbers and the power of these ideas, this puts the rising billion in the same category as exponential technologies, the do-it-yourselfers, and the techno philanthropists, as a potent force for abundance. Another quote that I enjoyed was, "If we stop thinking of the poor as victims or as a burden, and start recognizing them as a resilient and creative entrepreneurship and value-conscious consumers, a whole new world of opportunity will come up." And that's very true, especially, here's a good example. Iqbal Qadir went to New York City in 1993, and he worked with a company there, and he saw how everyone is connected via cell phone, and how this cell phone brings new possibilities and opportunities because of this connectedness. And he thought it would be good to bring that back to Bangladesh. So he proposed his idea, and everyone that heard it said, "No, that's a crazy idea. Why would you want to do that? What benefit will it have?" But he watched the cell phone evolve, and he realized that the cell phones were getting cheaper every year and smaller every year, which made them more accessible for the people of Bangladesh. He also realized the connection between connectivity and productivity. So he realized that if he brought cell phones, they would be connected, the people of Bangladesh, which would produce more productivity, which would produce more money. So he followed through with his plan and transformed life in Bangladesh. By 2006, 60 million people in Bangladesh had cell phones, and the technology had added 650 million to Bangladesh's GDP. So other companies decided to follow his example, and they filled gaps in other countries. In India, for example, by 2010, 15 million cell phone users were being added each month. And in 2011, 50% of the world had cellular connectivity. And this is exactly what transformed the bottom billion to the rising billion. A new market was created. So as you can see, we are moving in the right direction. We are achieving something every day. So now we ask ourselves, will today's version of the world be able to handle 9 million people, which is proclaimed to be on the planet by 2050? Will we actually be able to feed, shelter, and educate everyone? I think yes, we are ready for this challenge. Diamandis and Kotler very accurately list the 4 major motivators that drive innovation. First of all, we have curiosity. We ask ourselves, why is this happening? How is this happening? And with our knowledge, we want to solve this. We want to understand why it's happening and what we can do to stop it. We're curious. Second off, there's fear. An extraordinary fear enables extraordinary risk-taking. We also have the desire to create wealth. And the most important, every person has the desire for significance. They want their life to matter and they want to make a difference in the world. Humans are wired to compete. They're wired to hit hard targets. We are wired for this challenge. In the beginning, says Sir Arthur C. Clarke, the inventor of the geostationary communication satellite, people tell you that it's a crazy idea and it'll never work. Next, people say, it might work, but it's not worth doing. And finally, once you did it, they say, I told you that it would be a great idea. And it's hard to commit at first, even when people tell you that it's crazy and it's not worth doing. But in the end, you have to trust yourself and your strength and your power. Our society fears and dreads failure, but really, failure should be celebrated. It can be a huge engine of innovation when approached with the right attitude and seen as a blessing rather than a curse. It took Thomas Edison 1,000 tries to invent the light bulb. When asked what it felt like to fail 1,000 times, Edison responded, I didn't fail, I just created 1,000 ways that didn't work. So sometimes you just have to do it, and sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it does. And look what people's ideas have achieved in the past 4 decades. Developing worlds have experienced longer life expectancies, lower infant mortality rates, easier and better access to information, communication, and education, quality healthcare, political freedoms, sexual freedoms, and human rights. We're going somewhere. We already have. We find ourselves in a time where we don't have to wait for corporations to get interested in solutions or for the government to deal with our problems. We can do it ourselves. We live in a time where the whole world is connected through technology. We live globally. We can discuss with each other. We can inspire each other. We have the intelligence. We have the knowledge. We have the resources. We have the technology, the determination, the positivity, and the commitment to face the climate change challenge as one planet. We have all this in abundance, actually. As the authors of the #1 best-selling book of 2012, Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think state, abundance is both a plan and a perspective. Our perspectives shape our reality. Where there is vision, the people flourish and the impossible becomes possible. So really, there's no need to fear the future because you can create the future yourself, a future that benefits the people and the planet. So I know this was a lot of information, but I basically wanted to give you a brief view of what is happening in the world and what has been done so far, maybe as an inspiration to act yourself. And I'm not asking you to quit your job and save the planet. That's impossible. But maybe if we put a lot of time together and thought and creativity and imagination, we can create something together. I know I will do something, and I know my friends will do something. They will do something very big, actually. Will you?